something strange is happening to the Porsche 911. The base model says $129,950, but by the time you sign the paperwork, it's somehow over $180,000. And no, it's not inflation. It's a perfect storm of hidden taxes, brutal tariffs, and outrageous dealer markups that are quietly adding up to a 15% price spike. If you've ever dreamed of owning a 911, you need to hear this, because your dream car is about to cost way more than you think. The Porsche 911 has always been a symbol of engineering precision and prestige. For 2026, that legacy continues, but at a much higher cost than most buyers expect. On paper, the base 911 Carrera starts at $129,950. The GTS comes in at $172,050, and the high-performance GT3 is priced at $224,750. Those prices haven't changed drastically from recent years, but hidden beneath the surface is a cost structure that's quietly exploding. Most buyers never walk out of the dealership paying just MSRP, because once you factor in the 15% import tariff, 7% average US sales tax, and an increasingly common 5 to 10% dealer markup, the real price balloons fast. That $129,950 Carrera, it now costs over $180K before you even think about financing or insurance. And the GTS, with identical math, it jumps to $208,000. The GT3 reaches a staggering $311K and change. These aren't optional upgrades. These are the unavoidable costs built into today's market, and they're hitting American Porsche buyers harder than ever before. What used to be a top-end sports car for the affluent is now drifting into exotic territory. For many lifelong 911 fans, that shift is more than just financial. It feels like the brand is moving just out of reach. Think the MSRP is painful? Just wait until you see how tariffs and taxes stack up, line by line. Stick around because we'll show you exactly how a $130K 911 quietly becomes a $180K invoice. The biggest driver behind the 911's price surge is the import tariff placed on German-made vehicles. Originally announced on April 4, 2025, the US imposed a 25% tariff on EU-built cars, directly targeting brands like Porsche. But as of July 27th, that tariff has been cut to 15% under a new interim US-EU agreement. For buyers in the US, that still means an automatic 5-figure price increase. Let's take the 911 Carrera. At a base MSRP of $129,950, a 15% tariff adds $19,493. The GTS, priced at $172,050, takes on a $25,808 tariff, and the GT3, it absorbs a $33K charge. These are non-negotiable costs that affect every US buyer of a new German Porsche. But the damage doesn't stop there. On April 9th, a second layer of tariffs quietly came into effect, this time targeting imported parts and components. These range between 5 and 10%, depending on the item. That means repair costs, maintenance parts, and even scheduled servicing now carry a surcharge. Annual ownership costs have already crept up by $500 to $1,000, even for routine jobs like brake service or filter replacements. So now the base price is inflated and the parts are taxed too. But there's another charge waiting, one that changes based entirely on your zip code. Up next, the hidden cost of where you live. Once you've dealt with tariffs, there's still one more unavoidable hit: sales tax. It might not seem like a big deal at first, but when you're buying a 6-figure car, it adds up fast. Across the United States, the average sales tax is 7%, but depending on your state, that number can jump higher. For example, California sits at 8.5%, while states like New Hampshire and Oregon sit at 0. And since sales tax is applied after tariffs and markups, the numbers can get brutal quickly. Let's break it down. A 911 Carrera after a 15% tariff now costs $149,443. Apply a 7% sales tax to that, and you're adding $10,460. The GTS post-tariff hits $197,858 with 7% tax. That's $13,000 more. The GT3 climbs to $258,463 before tax. Add 7%, and that's an extra $18K and some change. And if you're in a high-tax state like California, you'll pay even more. For the GT3, an 8.5% rate bumps the tax bill to nearly $22,000, just in sales tax alone. These aren't fees you can negotiate. They're baked into your registration process, and skipping them isn't an option unless you legally register in a no-tax state, which comes with its own challenges. So even after beating tariffs, you still face a second wave of cost, one that changes based on nothing more than your zip code. Ever paid more in taxes than you expected on a car? Drop your state and how much extra it cost you, because for some 911 buyers, the tax hit is the real shock. Next, the part that stings the most, dealer markups. Just when you think you've accounted for everything, MSRP, tariffs, sales tax, there's one last punch to the wallet: dealer markups. And for 911 buyers, this is often the most frustrating part of the entire process. Unlike taxes and tariffs, markups are entirely at the dealer's discretion. They're not standardized. One buyer might pay sticker price, while another pays $10,000 more simply because demand is higher in their region or they didn't negotiate hard enough. In 2026, 5 to 10% markups are becoming the norm for high-demand 911 trims. For the Carrera, a 5% markup adds $6,498. For the GTS, it's $8,603, and for the GT3, that same 5% adds $11,238. Some dealers are pushing 10% on GT3s, which sends that markup over $22K. It's not just rare builds either. Even base Carreras are getting bumped because inventory is limited and demand remains strong despite the price hikes. One enthusiast noted that dealers are cashing in on GT3 hype, treating markups as standard procedure. This practice is why buyers are turning to used markets or out-of-state deals, because markups feel personal. They're not about economics or policy. They're about dealerships pushing margins on cars that already cost six figures. And unlike taxes or tariffs, these don't fund roads, infrastructure, or trade policy. They go straight into the dealership's pocket. Next, we'll put all of these numbers together, tariffs, taxes, and markups, and show you what a 2026 911 actually costs once everything is said and done. So let's put all the numbers together. MSRP, tariffs, taxes, and dealer markups. What's the true real-world cost of a 2026 Porsche 911? Start with the base Carrera, listed at $129,950. A 15% tariff adds $19,493. A 7% sales tax applies to the post-tariff amount, $10,460. A 5% dealer markup tacks on another $6,498. That brings the final cost to $166,401, more than $36,000 above MSRP. Now look at the GTS, starting at $172,050. Tariff, $25,808. Tax, $13,850. Markup, $8,603. Final cost, $219,833. And for the GT3, with a base of $224,750, tariff $33,713, tax $18,092, markup $11,238, total $287,793. These aren't theoretical figures. They reflect actual costs US buyers are absorbing in 2026, and the impact is clear. PCNA reported record Q1 2025 sales, up 41% year over year to 18,884 units. Meanwhile, performance alternatives like the Corvette Stingray, which sidesteps the German import tariff, are coming in under $100,000, even with added fees. It's a tempting proposition for anyone prioritizing horsepower over heritage. But for buyers loyal to Porsche, the equation isn't just about value. It's about identity, engineering, and experience. Still, with prices climbing this steeply, more people are searching for ways to save. There are strategies that work, and they're not just for wealthy collectors or insiders. Even with prices spiking, there are still smart ways to reduce your total cost, if you know where to look. One of the simplest strategies is buying in a low or no-tax state. States like New Hampshire and Oregon have zero sales tax, which could save you more than $11,000 on a GTS compared to buying in California. However, the car must be legally registered there, which may require residency or a legal business entity. Another option is to lease instead of buying outright. On a typical Carrera lease as of July 2025, monthly payments are around $1,799 with $5,000 down, and taxes are spread across the lease term rather than due all at once. It doesn't lower the total cost, but it softens the upfront hit. For those willing to consider pre-owned, there are deals to be found. Listings from Bring a Trailer show clean, low-mileage 2022 to 2025 GTS models selling between $140,000 to $145,000. That's $60,000 less than a brand new GTS with all the added fees. And if you're set on buying new, timing matters. In years when Porsche sales soften, or in slower quarters, dealers are more likely to negotiate, especially in Q4, when unsold inventory lingers. Saving money on a Porsche takes patience, timing, and knowing how these hidden costs work, but it's still possible to own one without falling into the full 15% trap. For many Porsche fans, buying a 911 has never been just about numbers. It's about heritage, about that first moment behind the wheel, about the connection to decades of motorsport, design, and precision. But in 2026, even the most loyal buyers are being forced to pause and reassess. A 15% price hike, driven entirely by tariffs, sales tax, and dealer markups, means the 911 is no longer just a high-end sports car. It's approaching exotic territory, even for base models. That pushes some longtime buyers out of the market, not because they don't want the car, but because the math no longer makes sense. At the same time, alternatives like the Corvette Stingray, which avoids the 15% import tariff, offer over 490 horsepower for well under $100,000. For performance-focused buyers, that's hard to ignore. Yet Porsche still holds something others don't: the GTS with a manual transmission, the unique balance of daily drivability and track capability, the attention to detail in every corner of the cabin. It's what keeps enthusiasts coming back, even as costs rise. So while prices are undeniably up, desire hasn't gone away. But what is changing is how buyers approach the process. They're more informed, more strategic, and far more aware of the hidden costs behind that dream purchase. Understanding the numbers is no longer optional. It's the only way to make Porsche ownership make sense in 2026. The 2026 Porsche 911 hasn't changed who it is. It's still the benchmark for rear-engine precision, a legacy machine that blends performance, emotion, and craftsmanship like nothing else. But the cost of ownership has changed drastically, and not because of Porsche itself. The real culprits are external: a 15% tariff that adds $19,000 to $33,000, sales tax that ranges from $9,000 to over $20,000, depending on where you live, dealer markups that quietly pile on $6,000 to $22,000, often with no warning. Together, these charges add up to a 15% increase, turning a $172K GTS into a $219,833 purchase and a GT3 into a $287K car. And these numbers are based on real invoices, not theory. Yet for those who plan carefully, there are ways to push back. Buying in low-tax states, timing purchases near Q4, leasing to soften tax hits, or even exploring high-quality used models can save tens of thousands. The badge still carries weight. The car still delivers. But in 2026, knowing the math is just as important as knowing the specs. If this video helped you see the real cost behind the 911, hit subscribe and drop a comment. Would you still pay 15% more for the same Porsche? And if you find a GTS under $145,000, don't just buy it. Tell us where. Because deals still exist. You just have to know where to look.